The year is 1943. Across the vast, unforgiving deserts of North Africa, a war rages, a brutal symphony of dust, heat, and relentless combat. Italian soldiers, many of them conscripts from humble villages, find themselves caught in a meat grinder, fighting under the banner of Mussolini's grand, yet increasingly fragile, fascist dream. They are told of a glorious future, a new Roman Empire, and of an America that is weak, divided, and on the brink of collapse. These are the narratives they carry in their hearts and minds as they face the overwhelming might of the Allied forces. They fight with courage born of desperation, but their supplies dwindle. Their allies treat them as expendable, and the relentless pressure from British and American forces from two directions becomes unbearable. Finally, the inevitable arrives. In Tunisia, after months of fighting without adequate provisions, General Giovanni Messi's First Army collapses. Hundreds of thousands of Axis troops surrender, among them some 50,000 Italian soldiers. Exhausted, malnourished, and resigned to their fate, they lay down their arms. They anticipate the worst. Propaganda has painted a grim picture of Allied captors. Harsh treatment, forced labor, perhaps even summary executions. They expect to be treated as enemies, as less than human. They brace themselves for suffering, but what they find awaiting them is a stark, bewildering contradiction to everything they have ever been taught. It is a revelation so profound, so utterly unexpected, that it will reshape not only their lives, but also the future of two nations. This is the story of how 51,000 Italian prisoners of war discovered an almost paradise in the heart of America, and how their unexpected journey transformed adversaries into allies and strangers into lifelong friends. Imagine, for a moment, the psychological state of a soldier who has known nothing but scarcity, conflict, and propaganda-fueled hatred for years. For these Italian soldiers, life in uniform had been defined by meager rations, worn-out uniforms, and the constant threat of death. Their bodies were accustomed to hunger, their minds to the rigid dogma of fascism. They had been promised an empire, but lived in a reality of constant struggle. Then, with surrender, came the terrifying unknown. The first step in this journey of profound contradiction began not in America, but in the collection camps of Tunisia. The sheer logistical efficiency of the American military immediately struck them. These men, many of whom had not seen a doctor in years, underwent thorough medical examinations. For some, it was the first real medical attention they had received since before the war. Aches and pains that had become constant companions were finally addressed. Diseases that had festered were treated. It was a basic humanity, yet for them it was a luxury. Their tattered uniforms, often more patches than original fabric, were replaced with clean, if generic, clothing. But it was the food that truly stunned them. After months or even years of survival rations, if they were lucky enough to get them, the Americans provided an unimaginable bounty. White bread, not the dark, gritty loaves they were used to. Canned meat, real protein, not a luxury. Coffee with sugar, a sweet indulgence they hadn't tasted in an age. And perhaps most astonishing of all, chocolate. These were not mere provisions. They were symbols of an abundance that defied their understanding, a stark contrast to the sacrifices and shortages that had defined their lives under fascist rule. This initial generosity wasn't just physical sustenance, it was a psychological assault on their ingrained beliefs. How could an enemy be so well-resourced, so seemingly indifferent to the concept of rationing? The journey across the Atlantic itself became a 2-week masterclass in American industrial might and economic prosperity. The Liberty ships that transported them weren't custom-built troop carriers. They were returning cargo vessels, having delivered vital supplies to the European theater. Rather than sail back empty, they were repurposed to carry human cargo. By the summer of 1943, these behemoths were ferrying up to 30,000 prisoners of war per month to American shores. To the Italian prisoners, these ships were monuments to a productivity their own nation could never hope to achieve. They witnessed the sheer scale of American manufacturing, vessels mass-produced at rates that would have seemed miraculous in Italy. On board, the contradictions continued. They observed radar equipment, technology they had only seen on advanced British warships, as standard issue on American cargo ships. It spoke volumes about the technological gap and the American capacity for innovation. And then there was the ship's mess. American sailors enjoyed ice cream machines, an unlimited supply of coffee, fresh bread, and an abundance of meat. They watched in disbelief as perfectly edible food was casually discarded, food that would have been treasured, rationed, and stretched for days in Italy. This casual waste, this almost thoughtless abundance, wasn't just about food. It was a visceral demonstration of resources beyond comprehension. A nation operating on a level of material wealth that fascists had dismissed as impossible. It was the first crack in the carefully constructed facade of Mussolini's propaganda. As these Liberty ships docked at ports like Norfolk, Virginia, and along the West Coast, the Italian prisoners disembarked into a world that continued to defy their imaginations. The ports themselves were gargantuan, sprawling across thousands of acres, with docks stretching for miles. Dozens of ships loaded and unloaded simultaneously. A symphony of commerce and logistics. Electric cranes towering over everything effortlessly lifted loads that would have required dozens of men and days of back-breaking labor in Italy. It was a machine, running smoothly, efficiently, endlessly. But even more striking than the industrial might was the civilian prosperity that surrounded these ports. Parking lots, vast expanses of asphalt, were filled to the brim with workers' automobiles. In Italy, a car was a luxury reserved for the truly wealthy, a symbol of extreme privilege. Here, it seemed, every ordinary worker owned one. Every building, from the smallest shed to the largest factory, blazed with electric lights. Shops displayed an array of goods that had vanished from Italian stores long before the war began. Consumer items, clothes, food, all available in seemingly endless supply. This wasn't a nation collapsing under the weight of war. This was a nation thriving, producing, consuming. Their journey into America's heartland, often by passenger train, further shattered their preconceptions. These weren't the cattle cars they might have expected. They rode in comfortable coaches with cushioned seats, electric lights, and even dining cars where they were served meals. The landscape outside the window unfolded a tableau of impossible wealth. Every small town they passed had electricity, automobiles, and shops brimming with goods. Factories ran 3 shifts, day and night, powered by the ubiquitous hum of electricity. Even rural farms, which in Italy were often subsistence operations clinging to ancient methods, here boasted tractors and electrical lines, symbols of modern efficiency and productivity. It was a vision of a future that felt alien, yet undeniably real. One such destination was Camp Hearn in Texas, or Camp Hereford, designated exclusively for Italian prisoners. The name itself, Hereford, would become synonymous with this extraordinary experience. This camp, encompassing 4 compounds with barracks, mess halls, and infirmaries, surrounded by barbed wire and monitored by armed guards, was not a resort. It was a prisoner of war camp. Yet, by Italian military standards, it was almost luxurious. At its peak, it housed 3,360 prisoners. The barracks had electric lights, a stark contrast to the flickering oil lamps or dim candles they were used to. They had hot showers, a daily ritual of cleanliness many hadn't enjoyed consistently for years. Flush toilets, a basic sanitation amenity, felt like a luxury. And, most surprisingly, heating, providing comfort against the harsh Texas plains. The hospitals within the camps contained equipment unavailable in Italy since before the war, including X-ray machines and modern surgical tools. For soldiers accustomed to makeshift medical care and limited resources, this was a revelation. It wasn't just about treating injuries. It was about treating individuals with dignity and the best available technology. The Italian prisoners, in their letters home, consistently described these camps as quasi-paradiso, almost paradise. And while isolated instances of mistreatment occurred, particularly towards those suspected of being ardent fascists, or those who resisted cooperation, the overall experience was one of surprising comfort and respect. They were housed in clean barracks, had access to hot showers, and, perhaps most importantly, an abundance of food. They could even spend the money they earned from work at the local PX, purchasing personal items and small luxuries. The food truly overwhelmed them. 3 meals a day, every day, featuring meat, vegetables, fresh bread, milk, and often dessert. Special meals for holidays exceeded anything they had known even before the war. Kitchen workers reported throwing away more food daily than their entire families in Italy received weekly. This wasn't just about sustenance, it was about the sheer psychological impact of constant, overwhelming abundance after years of deprivation. It chipped away at the foundations of their indoctrination, forcing them to question the narrative of a starving, struggling America. Then came a pivotal moment that irrevocably altered their status. September 8, 1943. Italy surrendered and signed an armistice with the Allies. Marshal Pietro Badoglio's government switched sides, declaring war on Germany on October 13th. Overnight, the enemy became a co-belligerent. The Prime Minister's instructions to Italian POWs were clear: collaborate with the Allies. Beginning in February 1944, the United States Army Service Corps presented the Italian POWs with an unprecedented opportunity to join what came to be known as Italian Service Units, ISU. They could choose to remain prisoners, or they could volunteer to work alongside Americans in non-combat roles. The response was overwhelming. Of the 51,000 Italian POWs held in the United States at the time, over 45,000 enthusiastically joined the service units. They signed pledges to assist against their former German allies and, in return, received privileges that fundamentally transformed their experience. Though officially still classified as POWs, they donned uniforms that were differentiated only by a small patch reading Italy on the left sleeve and stitched onto their standard garrison cap. This subtle change was profound. It symbolized a shift from enemy to ally, from prisoner to contributing member. They also received a monthly stipend of $24, a significant sum for men who had previously earned nothing. 1/3 of this was paid in cash, providing them with a sense of personal agency and purchasing power. The rest was issued as script to be used on base for various supplies and personal items. This newfound economic freedom further cemented their integration and sense of purpose. In places like California, where the intensity of fighting in the Pacific made the war palpable through to the end of 1945, Italian POWs working in support of the war effort were received with particular enthusiasm. California's large Italian-American population, established since the gold rush era as fishermen, farmers, and winemakers, embraced the POWs. For these Italian-Americans, the soldiers were not enemies, but countrymen caught in the machinery of war. Now, on the right side of history, they opened their homes, their churches, and their hearts. One of the most remarkable stories unfolded with the Italian POWs stationed on Angel Island in San Francisco Bay. With their earnings, these men organized Saturday night dances in a rented hall in San Francisco. These weren't mere informal gatherings, they became major social events. American women attended, chaperoned, of course, but eager to meet the charming, often melancholic Italian soldiers. It was a vibrant cultural exchange, a testament to the power of music and dance to transcend national divides. These interactions fostered connections, friendships, and in many cases, deeper romantic bonds, illustrating the profound human desire for connection, even amidst conflict. Italian ISU members became essential contributors to the American war effort across various sectors. They loaded ships destined for D-Day, their labor directly supporting the liberation of Europe. They harvested crops that would have rotted in the fields without their dedicated work, ensuring vital food supplies for both America and its allies. Their expertise, gained perhaps in the harsh realities of North Africa, was put to use maintaining military equipment. The Italian service units accounted for an astonishing over 90 million man-days of labor in the United States from 1943 to 1945. In financial terms, this program saved the United States government an estimated $230 million, an immense sum at the time. At the Brooklyn Army Terminal, Italian prisoners of war worked with palpable enthusiasm, loading supplies for the liberation of Europe. Every shipment brought Italy closer to freedom from German occupation, and they knew it. They painted messages on boxes destined for Italy. For the liberation of Rome, death to the Nazis. When Rome finally fell on June 4, 1944, Italian POWs and Italian Americans held joint celebrations across America, their shared joy reflecting the transformation from former enemies to united allies in the fight against Nazi Germany. At Camp Hereford, prisoners and local residents held a victory mass that drew thousands, a powerful symbol of their reconciliation. Throughout their captivity, Italian POWs experienced genuine American kindness. When prisoners received news of family deaths from bombings in Italy, American guards and commanders attended memorial services, offering solemn respect and a shared sense of humanity. Local families often adopted prisoners who had lost everything, ensuring they weren't alone during holidays. These were not mere gestures. They were acts of profound empathy that chipped away at any remaining resentment or suspicion. Medical treatment, in particular, left a lasting impression. Italian doctors worked alongside American medical staff, learning modern techniques and utilizing equipment unavailable in Italy for years. Prisoners received operations and treatments that would have been available only to the wealthy in Italy. further demonstrating the American commitment to humane treatment regardless of status. The separation between German and Italian prisoners became more pronounced after Italy's surrender. While many German POWs often maintained staunch Nazi ideology, Italians almost universally embraced their new status as co-belligerents, working enthusiastically for Allied victory. This stark contrast highlighted the different political and cultural contexts from which these soldiers came, and the different paths their captivities would take. In March 1944, the U.S. military sent 1,800 ISU members to Boston. Initially housed at Camp McKay in South Boston, these prisoners received a frosty reception from locals. Boston's Italian-American community, keen to demonstrate their loyalty as Americans, initially viewed the POWs with suspicion, fearing they would damage the community's hard-won reputation. But transformation came quickly. The Italian POWs proved themselves industrious workers at the Boston port of embarkation. They sang in church choirs, their beautiful voices enriching local services. They cooked for festivals, introducing authentic Italian cuisine to second-generation Italian Americans who had grown up on Americanized versions and had never tasted the real thing. Their cultural contributions broke down barriers. As a result of rising tensions with the South Boston community, 1,300 of the ISU members were transferred to Pettick Island in Boston Harbor a few months later. On the island, they enjoyed even more freedom, with trustees allowed Sunday boat trips into Boston's North End, where they often dined with Italian-American families, forging bonds that would last for decades. Italian POWs witnessed American industrial and agricultural production on a scale that truly defied comprehension. In California's Central Valley, they saw single farms producing more than entire Italian provinces. Mechanical harvesters processed in hours what would take weeks of manual labor in Italy. They watched as perfect fruit was discarded for minor blemishes, and entire crops were sometimes plowed under to maintain prices. This waste, which would have prevented starvation in Italy, here demonstrated an unlimited production capacity, a nation so rich in resources that it could afford to be inefficient in ways unimaginable to them. The casual attitude toward abundance stunned them most. Workers threw away half-eaten lunches, left lights burning in empty rooms, and drove automobiles to work. All unthinkable in wartime Italy, where families survived on meager rations and every resource was meticulously conserved. Men were put to work in the fields or on fishing boats, earning $8 a month. Even this modest wage seemed generous to men who had nothing, and they saved carefully, often with the intention of sending money home to their families after the war. These Italian prisoners of war left permanent marks on American culture. They introduced bocce ball to communities that still play today, fostering a recreational activity that brought people together. They taught Americans how to make authentic pasta and pizza, helping to launch what would become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Their decorative work, fountains, murals, and chapels remains in dozens of locations across the country, a testament to their artistic tradition and the enduring Italian spirit. The camp newspapers, published by the POWs themselves, showed a remarkable transformation. Articles evolved from simple news about Italy to sophisticated discussions of democracy, American farming techniques, and plans for post-war reconstruction. These publications circulated among camps, spreading ideas about democratic governance and modern methods, subtly re-educating the prisoners not through force, but through exposure to a functioning, successful society. On July 16, 1944, The 38th and 40th Italian Quartermaster Services Companies arrived at Rock Island Arsenal by train from Pine Camp, New York. They performed maintenance and support work that proved so valuable that commanders actually requested delays in their repatriation after the war ended, testament to their skill and diligence. At agricultural sites, Italian POWs demonstrated expertise from generations of farming tradition, introducing techniques that improved American agriculture. Their work in canneries, shipyards, and military depots freed thousands of Americans for combat duty. The volunteers in the Italian service units essentially filled vital supporting roles, allowing American soldiers to serve on the front lines, thereby reducing the need for more drafts. The sheer scale of the Italian POW experience in America is often overlooked. At its peak in May 1945, a total of 425,171 POWs were held in the U.S., including 371,783 Germans, 50,173 Italians, and 3,115 Japanese. The 51 as Italian POWs were placed in 21 camps across 18 states. Their labor contribution totaled an astounding 90 million man-days, saving the U.S. government an estimated $230 million in labor costs. Thousands of Americans were freed for combat duty, and critical harvests were saved from rotting in the fields. The integration success was remarkable. 45,000 joined Italian service units. Less than 1% attempted escape. Thousands maintained correspondence with American families post-war, and many eventually returned as legal immigrants. Repatriation began in late 1945, but it proceeded slowly. America still needed their labor for the transition to peacetime, and many Italian POWs didn't want to leave. They had found friendship, dignity, and opportunity in America, while Italy remained destroyed and occupied. When departures finally began, entire communities turned out to say goodbye. At Camp Hereford and other camps, local newspapers wrote about losing friends, not just prisoners. Relationships formed during captivity, both romantic and platonic, faced the pain of separation. Between December 1945 and July 1946, Italian POWs returned to Italy, carrying with them not just memories, but a wealth of knowledge of American democracy, advanced agricultural techniques, and industrial methods. They became inadvertent architects of Italy's post-war reconstruction, implementing American approaches learned during their captivity. As promised, many former POWs eventually returned to America as legal immigrants, sponsored by employers who valued their skills, families they had befriended, or American women they had married. Thousands made new lives in America, succeeding remarkably. They founded businesses, particularly in food industries and import-export trade between Italy and America, maintaining connections that facilitated post-war recovery and trade. Former POWs and their descendants achieved prominence in American society, becoming judges, business leaders, military officers, and community leaders. Their children, raised with both Italian and American heritage, bridged cultures in unique ways, embodying the success of this extraordinary exchange. Today, physical reminders of the Italian POW experience survive across America. At Camp Hereford, a small chapel built by prisoners in 1945 still stands, constructed to honor 5 men who died at the camp. It features concrete made to look like marble and serves as a pilgrimage site for descendants. Bocce courts from California to Massachusetts trace their origins to Italian POWs who introduced the game. Italian festivals in unlikely places like Texas and Utah celebrate this enduring legacy. Recipes taught by POW cooks remain family traditions in many American households. But the true monuments are the families and communities transformed by this experience. Business relationships established during the 1940s continue through third and fourth generations. Sister city relationships between American and Italian towns originated from POW connections, fostering diplomatic ties at a grassroots level. Historians recognize the Italian POW experience as remarkably successful in transforming enemies into allies. Unlike traditional re-education through propaganda, Italian POWs were converted through direct experience, witnessing American democracy and prosperity firsthand. Several factors contributed to this success. Italy's surrender in 1943, which changed their status from enemy to co-belligerent. The presence of Italian-American communities that provided vital cultural bridges. The shared Catholic faith of many Italians and Americans, which created bonds. Italy's pre-war economic struggles, which made POWs more receptive to alternatives, and, critically, American abundance and kindness, which directly contradicted fascist propaganda. The contrast with German POWs is instructive. While many Germans often maintained their Nazi ideology despite similar humane treatment, Italians almost universally embraced American values. This difference reflected deep cultural factors and the timely nature of Italy's surrender, allowing for a psychological shift that was not possible for many German prisoners still loyal to Hitler's regime. The Italian POW experience profoundly influenced both nations. For America, it demonstrated the immense power of kindness and prosperity in winning hearts and minds, proving that soft power could be as effective, if not more so, than brute force. For Italy, the returning POWs brought in valuable knowledge that contributed directly to post-war democratic development and economic recovery. Former POWs helped establish crucial business connections between Italy and America, facilitating trade and investment. They introduced American agricultural and industrial techniques that modernized Italian production, laying groundwork for the Italian miracle of the 1950s and 1960s. Most importantly, they carried home memories of democracy functioning successfully, providing tangible models for Italy's post-war government. The program succeeded precisely because it relied on demonstration rather than indoctrination. Italian POWs saw American society functioning effectively while treating enemies with dignity. They witnessed production capacity that made victory inevitable. They experienced living standards that exposed fascist promises as mere fantasies. Starting in the 1970s, former Italian POWs began organizing reunions in America. These gatherings celebrated transformation and friendship rather than captivity. The 1988 reunion at Camp Hereford drew hundreds of former POWs and thousands of Americans who had known them. Veterans spoke of profound gratitude for American kindness, of lives transformed by captivity, of enemies who had become family. Their testimonies emphasized that their imprisonment had, unexpectedly, been a stroke of fortune, opening doors to democracy, prosperity, and enduring friendship. At these reunions, elderly men who had arrived as Mussolini's soldiers embraced American guards who had become lifelong friends. Their grandchildren, American and Italian, played together, living proof of reconciliation. So, why did Italian POWs call American camps almost paradise? Not because captivity itself was pleasant, for no imprisonment is truly desirable, but because it revealed possibilities they never imagined. They discovered that true prosperity came from freedom rather than conquest, that diversity created strength rather than weakness, and that democracy functioned better than dictatorship. They witnessed ordinary Americans living better than Italian aristocracy. They saw workers owning automobiles, farms using machinery, factories producing unimaginable abundance. They experienced kindness from their enemies that their own government never showed them. The paradise was relative, a stark contrast to years of war, starvation, and propaganda lies. American camps offered food, safety, and dignity. Compared to what awaited in bombed, occupied Italy, America represented hope and opportunity. The Italian POW experience enriched American culture permanently. Pizza, now a multi-billion-dollar industry, was popularized partly by POW cooks who taught Americans authentic preparation methods. Espresso culture, decades before Starbucks, was introduced by Italian prisoners to communities that had never tasted real coffee. In small towns across America, Italian festivals celebrate connections born from the POW experience. In Hereford, Texas, the annual POW reunion became a cherished community tradition. In California's Central Valley, wineries founded by former POWs or their descendants produce wines using techniques brought from Italy, blending traditions. The linguistic impact was significant too. Thousands of Americans learned Italian from POWs, creating a generation of Italian speakers who would facilitate post-war business and cultural exchange. Italian words, particularly in food and agriculture, entered local vocabularies, beyond the immediate $230 million in labor value. Italian POWs contributed to long-term economic connections. Former prisoners who became American citizens or maintained business relationships facilitated billions in trade between Italy and America. The agricultural techniques they learned and implemented in Italy helped that nation's post-war agricultural recovery. The industrial methods they observed influenced Italian manufacturing, contributing directly to the aforementioned Italian miracle of the 1950s and 1960s. American businesses benefited immensely from connections with former POWs who understood both cultures, leading to flourishing import-export firms, food companies, and manufacturing partnerships begun in the most unlikely of places. Prison camps. Studies of former Italian POWs revealed remarkable psychological outcomes. Unlike many POW populations who suffered lasting trauma, Italian prisoners in America showed significantly lower rates of depression and PTSD than Italian soldiers who were not captured. Psychologists attribute this to several factors: excellent treatment that exceeded their expectations, meaningful work that provided a sense of purpose, social integration that reduced isolation, educational opportunities that offered hope for the future, and the profound transformation from enemy to ally status after Italy's surrender. The psychological impact extended to their families. Children of former POWs often reported that their fathers spoke positively of their captivity, a highly unusual perspective for war experiences. This positive framework influenced family dynamics and international perspectives for generations, creating a legacy of reconciliation rather than resentment. The story of Italian POWs in America demonstrates war's astonishing capacity for unexpected transformation. Men who arrived as Mussolini's soldiers left as democracy's advocates. Enemies became friends. Prisoners became partners, and many ultimately became Americans. Through simple acts of humanity, sharing food, providing medical care, allowing religious worship, enabling correspondence with families. America converted adversaries more effectively than any propaganda could achieve. The Italian POWs witnessed American society at its best, a society of unparalleled abundance, freedom, and opportunity, and they wanted that prosperity and freedom for their own nation. Their contribution went far beyond mere labor. They enriched American culture, strengthened Italian-American communities, and built bridges between nations that endure to this day. Their descendants, whether in Italy or America, embody the possibility of reconciliation and friendship after conflict. The Italian POWs found their quasi-paradiso not in the camps themselves, but in the profound revelation of what a society could achieve through democracy and freedom. They returned to Italy, carrying the seeds of transformation that would help build a democratic nation from fascism's ruins. In the end, 51,000 Italian soldiers captured in North Africa discovered in American captivity what Mussolini's empire could never provide: dignity, opportunity, and hope. They called it paradise, not because it was perfect, but because it showed them perfection was possible. Through their transformation, enemies became family, and two nations found a friendship that endures across generations. Their legacy reminds us that even in war's darkest moments, humanity can prevail, that kindness can conquer where weapons cannot, that showing enemies a better way may transform them into friends. The Italian POWs who found paradise in America proved that reconciliation is possible, that democracy's example is powerful, and that treating enemies with dignity can yield a victory more lasting than any battlefield triumph. The camps are mostly gone now, returned to farmland, or developed into suburbs, their barbed wire long since removed, their barracks dismantled. But in Hereford, Texas, a small chapel still stands, a quiet testament. In California, bocce courts echo with Italian voices, a reminder of games played decades ago. In countless American communities, families trace their roots to an Italian soldier who found paradise in captivity and chose to stay. They came as warriors of a failed empire. They left as builders of a democratic future. They arrived as prisoners. They discovered paradise. And in that discovery, two nations forged a friendship that neither war nor time could break.